Justice is a word that sounds clean when spoken slowly. A word that carries weight, dignity, even hope. But in some places, justice is not a principle. It is a transaction. It's negotiated in silence, decided behind closed doors, and delivered with confidence by men who no longer remember what it truly means. In a city like Lagos, where power moves quietly but decisively, justice does not always belong to the truth. Sometimes it belongs to the highest bidder. And in the middle of that system sat a man who had mastered the art of delivering it. His name was Kelechi Okoro. At 38, he was already everything many men twice his age could never become. A federal high court judge. Sharp, calculated, unshaken. His rise had been fast, almost too fast, but no one questioned it loudly. In a system like his, questions had a way of disappearing before they were fully formed. From the outside, his life was the definition of success. His house stood in a quiet, wealthy part of the city. Large glass panels, polished floors, a space that echoed slightly when you walked through it. His cars were new, always clean, always waiting. His suits were tailored perfectly, each one fitting him like it had been designed for authority itself. But inside that life, there was something missing. Silence. Not the peaceful kind, the heavy kind. The kind that follows a man who has spent too many years ignoring the sound of his own conscience. Kelechi did not start this way. There was a time, long before the wealth, before the power, when he believed in the law, when he saw it as something sacred, something that protected people, something that stood above money, above influence, above fear. Back then, he was just a young lawyer with a small office and big ideas. His clothes were simpler, his environment more modest, but his mind was alive, curious, sharp, driven by something real. But the system he entered was not built for men like that. It did not reject him outright. That would have never been easy. Instead, it tested him. The first offer came quietly. A small case, a simple favor. Nothing too serious, just a slight adjustment to the direction of things. It came with a smile, with reassurance, with the kind of language that makes wrong decisions sound harmless. He hesitated. Of course he did. Every man does, the first time. But hesitation, when left alone for too long, begins to weaken. And when the reward is placed directly in front of you, it becomes easier to justify. It was just one case, just one. That was how it all began. And like most things that start small, it did not stay small. The favors grew, the names became bigger, the expectation clearer, and before long, Kelechi was no longer being asked, he was being relied on. By the time he became a judge, the system had already accepted him. And once the system accepts you, it does not let you go. From his seat in the courtroom, elevated above everyone else, he became something more than just a man. He became a final voice, a decision maker, a gatekeeper between consequence and escape. People stood before him with hope in their eyes. Others stood with fear. But the truth was, their fate had often been decided long before they entered that room. His role was simple. Make it official. Over the years, he perfected it. His voice never shook. His expression never betrayed him. His judgments were delivered with a calm authority that made them feel unquestionable. And slowly, something inside him changed. The first few times it had bothered him. The first few lies he uttered unjustly had stayed with him. He followed him home, whispered in the quiet hours of night. But time has a way of dulling even the sharpest guilt. And eventually, it stopped bothering him. Or at least, that's what he told himself. Because sometimes, late at night, when the house was too quiet and the city's noise had faded into the distance, he would sit alone, drink in hand, staring at nothing in particular. Not thinking, not relaxing, just sitting. as if something inside him was trying to speak, and he was doing everything possible not to listen. Years passed like that, case after case, decisions after decisions, each one adding another layer between the man he used to be and the man he had become. Until one day, a case arrived that refused to behave like others. At first, it looked normal. A corruption case, high profile, yes, but nothing he hadn't handled before. The kind of case that usually came with clear instructions, quiet arrangement, and a predictable ending. But this one was different. The deeper he looked, the more it expanded. Names began to connect in ways that didn't make sense. Documents pointing to people who were never supposed to be linked. The structure behind it was bigger than anything he had seen. This was not just corruption. This was a network, a system within a system. And for the first time in a long time, Kelechi paid attention. Not because he wanted to, but because something about it refused to be ignored. Then the calls started. At first, they were familiar, calm, controlled, the usual reminders dressed as polite conversation, the kind he had heard many times before. But as the days passed, the tone shifted. The calm disappeared. What replaced it was something colder, sharper. This was no longer influence. This was pressure. And beneath that pressure was something else. Fear. Not his own, theirs. Which meant one thing. This case mattered. More than any case he had ever touched. For the first time in years, Kelechi found himself unsettled. Not visibly, not in the way anyone else could see. But internally, something had started to move. Something he had buried a long time ago. He began to notice things he had ignored before. The weight of his decision, the pattern of destruction left behind, the quiet reality that everything he had been built on compromise. One night, standing alone in front of a mirror, he studied his own reflection longer than usual. Not adjusting his tie, not preparing for anything, just looking, as if trying to recognize someone he had not seen in years. And in that moment, something shifted. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but enough. Enough to create a crack. Enough to let something through. By the time the day of judgment arrived, the entire system was watching. They did not need to be present physically. Their presence was already there, in expectations, in certainty, in the quiet assumption that everything would go as planned. Because it always had. The courtroom was full, not just with people, but with tension. The kind that settles into the air and refuses to leave. Kelechi sat in his usual position, composed, still, unreadable. But inside, the silence was louder than it had ever been. For the first time in his career, there was no instruction he was willing to follow, no script he was ready to perform. This decision was his, and that realization carried a weight he had not felt in years. When he finally began to speak, the room held its breath, not because they expected something different, but because they didn't. And that was the moment everything changed. Because for the first time since he had entered the system, Kelechi Okoro chose the truth. He did not raise his voice, he did not hesitate. But what he said broke everything. The reaction was immediate. Shock, confusion, disbelief. The kind of response that only comes when something impossible has just happened. But Kelechi did not react. He simply finished and sat back, calm, as if he had just done something ordinary. But deep down, he knew that this decision did not free him. It exposed him. Because in a world built on control, truth is not seen as courage. It is seen as betrayal. And betrayal is punished. The call came sooner than expected. Short, direct, final. There were no threats, no shouting, no need for it. The message was clear enough. He had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. That night, as he drove through the same city he had ruled from a distance for years, there was no panic in him, no attempt to escape, no sudden regret, just clarity, a strange, quiet kind. As if for the first time in a long time, Everything made sense. He understood what was coming and he accepted it. Because deep down, he knew something else. If he had made that decision years ago, things would have been different. The road ahead was dark. The city light blurred slightly against the glass as light rain began to fall. And then it happened. Fast, clean, final. The kind of action carried out by people who do not make mistakes. The car slowed, then stopped. And just like that, Kelechi Okoro's life came to an end. Not because he was corrupt, but because he finally refused to be. And in that quiet stillness that followed, in the space between what was and what could have been, something shifted. Because death was not the end of a story, it was only the beginning.